welcome back everyone to another speedrun episode. I know it's been a little while since I last posted in this series. If you missed my last several uploads, you'll know that I just finished a very strong tournament in Qatar. It was the Qatar Masters. And in that tournament, I was playing high-rated opponents every single game, 9 rounds of classical chess. So it will be a little bit weird transitioning from that to the speedrun account where my rating is 561. But if you're new to watching the series, the way this works is I start on a fresh account. I did start at a 400 elo and I'll try to work my way up as high as possible. So I have updated my profile picture. We have baby me. I think this was taken when I was 2 years old, so maybe 1995-ish. As I progress through the series, I'll be updating my photo to hopefully show the progression of how I've aged over the last 30 years. So anyway, let's hop into a game. Now, I do want to note this will be 10-minute chess, and every opponent who I play, their rating will get refunded. Okay, so we have e4, e5. As usual, I will stick with some classical openings, stick with the openings that I recommend for this rating level. And yeah, as usual, my opponent deviating from mainline opening theory. Now, this move is not a blunder because it does defend the pawn, but generally, black should not be moving the queen out on move 2. And basically, the way to punish a move like queen f6 is simply to bring out the minor pieces. And hopefully very soon we'll see the downside of black having brought out the queen early. So basically what I can do is start exploiting the queen. Now I do have an option here of playing knight d5 right away. The issue with knight d5, assuming my opponent sees the queen is attacked, is they could move back and then later play c6, and then I'm gonna lose time moving my knight. So I think a more productive move here is pawn d4. Very simply trying to open the center, and also having an idea of getting the bishop to g5. Now, of course, okay, I should deal with the pawn capture first. I'll take with the knight. This is nice because queen supports the knight, and yeah, I have 2 knights developed. Black only has a queen developed. Now, one downside is I no longer have bishop g5, but okay, now I have some options because even though my knight is attacked, I don't have to move it. I'm debating here between, okay, knight b5 does look nice, just simply threatening the fork. There's also knight d5, which hits the queen and threatens a fork on c7. I guess this question how tricky I want to be, because if I play knight d5, then black can take and take and take, and I probably win material in the end, but then my knight could get stuck. And to keep things simple, because really this is, at this rating level, you don't want to overthink things too much. I'm just going to play knight b5. Simply saving the knight, now threatening the fork. And we'll see if black can defend here. And there's not too many moves to defend. So a6, this is a very typical beginner mistake. Attacking the knight, but not acknowledging my threat. And now, yeah, I'll be picking up the rook next move. I will be showing no mercy. Black has 3 legal moves here. Take the rook. A nice thing with the pawn having committed here, my knight can escape via b6. There are cases where sometimes when I take the rook, the knight could get trapped. But it looks like the knight will be escaping to live on for a little bit longer. Now there's another idea here of bringing the knight to d5, which has been an idea since I brought the knight to c3. And I guess I have to decide, like, do I want to bring this knight back? Do I want to bring this knight forward? Do I want to be sneaky and play h5 to prepare bishop g5? h4, I should say. Or do I just want to develop, like bishop c4, bring another piece into play, get ready to castle? There are, I think, a lot of fine options for white. I'm most inclined to bring this knight back. I think this is the simplest approach. Because I want a rook, and I want to make sure that I'm not losing anything. Ideally, I would like to trade, like knight takes c8 or knight d5. Yeah, let's play knight d5. And even though I've moved this knight a lot of times, like this knight has gone from g1 to d4 to b5 to c7 to a8 to b6, and now it's traded off. But every single knight move has been with a clear purpose. And now this knight is extra strong, hitting the queen. We'll probably see queen e5, queen e6. There's a handful of safe squares that the queen can move to. And I think both of us this game have not done a great job of like being efficient with development. Of course, for me, I broke some principles because it was justified in winning material. But now it's time to actually complete my development. I like the move bishop to d3, simply defending the pawn, preparing to castle, queen g6 while castle. Yeah, defending the pawn on g2. And now going forward from here, it's still a question how to convert my extra rook into eventually winning the game. And of course, like trading is one way to try and simplify. But in a position like this, especially with my king pretty safe and black's king in the center, not castling, sometimes the best strategy is to try and organize an attack. But of course, to attack, I need to get more pieces into play, or just wait for my opponent to resign. Okay, I guess my opponent did not want to suffer much longer there. So what's the lesson to take away from this game? Black should have, rather than playing queen f6, should have played knight c6 in the opening. This is really the standard move. And I think we saw the downside with black's opening play. He kicked my knight early, but allowed me to get the early tactic. And in this position, I did want to make a note that the way for black to defend here, it's not pretty. And there's really not too many options, but there are maybe a couple reasonable moves. One is knight a6. And even though it's usually bad to put the knight on the edge of the board, it does cover knight c7. The other move would be queen d8, just kind of undoing the previous queen move, but again covering c7. And if we saw this move or this move, I was going to bring my knight to d5, and essentially black would have to have the knight and the queen controlling c7 to effectively defend. And this would still be good for white, but I don't think white's winning any material here, so this would have been more of a fight. But anyway, pretty quick game there. That was 13 moves, so let's play another one. I'll hop in the pool. And white again, playing Alex Murray, 74. And I'll play e4. And okay, we'll repeat the same. Oops, sorry for hitting the mic. Repeating the same opening. This time, opponent plays the best move, knight c6. And I will play bishop to c4. Italian opening. There's a lot of options for white, even like on the third move, but also in this position. There's a fried liver, there's d3, there's knight c3. I think I mentioned, or I showed in a previous game, knight c3 does run into the center fork trick. I think that was a previous episode of the speedrun. So I'm going to play the very solid and probably one of the most common moves, pawn d3, leading into a more typical Italian. Knight g5, of course, is a more aggressive approach, leading to a fried liver. But d3 simply defends a pawn, prepares to develop the bishop. And this is one of the first openings I played as like a young child. Um, I played this opening with a very clear plan in mind. And I think I'll try and demonstrate that plan going forward from here. So I'm going to play knight c3. Now there's no center fork trick. Knight takes e4, I can take back with pawn. But here my opponent is actually trying to attack me right away. Knight f2 or knight takes f2 is a threat. Also bishop takes f2, of course. Now in this position, knight g4 is not actually a great approach for black, very simply because white can castle. And I really don't mind if black takes twice on f2. We might see this play out. I did want to note that if the knight were to stay on f6, like going back here, if black were to castle, my plan was going to be bishop g5 and knight d5. And yeah, when I was younger, I won a lot of games with that plan. But we do see knight takes f2. And I think this will be very instructive because from a pure point value perspective, when we think about how much the pieces are worth, black traded knight and bishop for rook and pawn. So you would think that's 6 points for 6 points. But pieces aren't always directly matched their values, especially earlier in the game. And generally in the opening and middle game, the minor pieces are much more valuable than the rook, simply because the rooks take a long time to actually activate. And my minor pieces in this position can hopefully very quickly orchestrate some attack. But it's still a question how to proceed from here. And I would really like to develop my bishop. I'd like to move bishop to g5. I'm going to play this because there's no... It's not legal for black to play pawn f6 because the f-pawn is pinned. So black has to either play this or this to save the queen. And with both moves, it's already looking a little bit ugly for black. I think my follow-up is going to be knight d5. Yeah, I think we're already seeing the consequences of black's trade on f2. I remember when I first saw this, like as a younger player, it did look scary because the king on f2 seems very exposed. But the thing is, the king isn't weak if the opponent can't exploit it. And in this case, there's really no great way for black to exploit my king. And meanwhile, yeah, it's black's pieces who are getting exploited here. So now the knight is pinned and attacked twice. Now I should note, when I play knight d5, I do block my bishop. So this makes f6 available. But the problem is if black plays f6, I'm going to have a discovered check against the king. So I actually don't see a great way for black to get out of this. Sorry, I just had some Vietnamese food, some food stuck in my teeth. What to do? I might cut that out. Or not, I don't know. Okay, so we do see f6. So now we're in a position where any knight move I play, there's, what, 8 legal moves with this knight. So every single knight move will be a check. Now the most obvious approach just seems to take the knight, and that would be double check. But I want to pause here and just make sure. If I take the knight, black is going to play this, and then my knight and bishop will be hanging. So I might have to concede some material back. The other approach is I can take the pawn, force the king here, and then move back and try and win the knight. Yeah, there's a couple nice looking approaches here. Yeah, the thing is, after takes here, I guess I could take the bishop. Yeah, that might be the simplest. And then we're trading. Although black takes here, and then my knight is trapped. yeah, I don't want to overthink this too much, but I do want to like play the most principled approach. I'm actually leaning towards taking the pawn. Even though it's going to open the f file, it does look a little bit scary. Taking the pawn will force king h8, and then I'll move back, and black is in the same predicament. I should be winning a lot of material there. And yeah, the nice thing about double check is the king has to move. There's no way to like block the check or capture because there's two pieces attacking the king. So this is the only legal move. And generally, when you have only one legal move, you should realize the situation you are in and play it pretty quickly. Yeah, the bishop can't be blocked either. So okay, now I'll move back. And now there's no pawn to obstruct my bishop. And yeah, there's not really any easy way for black to exploit my king. I mean, my knight's pinned. It'd be nice for black to jump over the knight and take the bishop, but that's not quite legal. This is not spell chess. And even if the rook tries to defend the knight, I'm going to take, and yeah, I'll be up at least a minor piece after all said and done. Another thing I want to mention is with my king on f2, generally, if I do have time, I would like to put it back on g1, essentially get the king back to the castle square, even sometimes go to h1, where it would be the safest. But for now, that's it's not really necessary. And now I do want to share, I'm not sure if this will play out in the way I'm dreaming of, but with my bishop already on a very nice diagonal and potentially controlling this g8 square, there's going to be some possible mating ideas, especially if my queen can come in, especially if I can get a knight to g6. So I'm imagining, like, if I do take on e7 and maybe get my king back and either get my queen to h5 or maybe maneuver to h4, then the combination of queen, bishop on c4, and then knight coming to g6 could be some pretty brutal checkmates. But yeah, still many moves away from that happening. I'm hoping at least one game in this episode will end with checkmates. Maybe I'll keep playing games until I get one checkmate on the board, hoping the opponent doesn't resign here. But I do understand, like, sometimes when you get a losing position from early on, it's not always the most fun to play out. But one tip I will give for newer players is if you are losing, you should play it out, because a lot of players do struggle to convert winning positions. And yeah, when I was younger, my chess coach had a rule for me, like, never resign. And I think that's one of the ways I learned how to just put up a lot of resistance from really bad or losing positions. And over the years, I've saved a lot of positions, even much worse than this from the black side. Opponents taking time, maybe trying to find their miracle resource, maybe just crying. This is one reason why I sometimes like over the board chess more than online chess. It's online, it's just the time ticking, nothing's really happening, but over the board chess you can see your opponent suffer. Okay, now do I want to actually take the knight? So I'm realizing with the last move, I have another option of knight takes pawn. And this can lead to the potential fork. I don't think I'm really risking much. Like, when I take the pawn, I do allow rook f8 check, but then I can move back to g1. And then meanwhile, yeah, the knight's still pinned. I'm going to take the pawn. like even though taking on e7 with either piece would have won material, in general, you don't necessarily have to take a pinned piece right away. Because, yeah, the piece can't really move. And rather than catching a small fish, I want to catch one of these big fish. Now my minor pieces. I mean, this is a dream scenario with just having all the minor pieces applying maximum pressure from early on. Like every single piece is playing a role. Like even though this bishop is blocked, it's hopefully going to play a role pretty soon. So move back to g1. And I'm not getting in knight f7 as I was hoping, but now the knight is less defended, so bishop takes e7 is a monster threat. Not to mention my queen's ready to come in. So there's going to be ideas of like knight g6, maybe eventually. Okay, so the rook moves back, and now I do have the fork. I'm looking for potential mates, but yeah, mate will be coming, especially like once I win the queen. I think everything is going to crumble for black. Yeah, king g8's the only legal move here. It's possible we'll see resignation because this gets really bad. Like king g8, I take, and then the knight will be hanging. Yeah. Okay, so 15 moves. I think this is a very important lesson. It goes to show why this trade is not good, especially for the side that it's conceding the minor pieces. And in a similar manner, I had the same option to play knight g5 in this position. And this is not effective for the same reason, because black can castle, and after takes, then it's black getting the minor pieces, 2 minor pieces for rook and pawn. And this would be much preferable for black. So I hope this lesson is valuable to people watching, because I know there's a lot of people out there that think it's a fair trade and maybe would think that it's good to expose a king like this. But yeah, usually in the middle game, actually in most stages of the game, 2 minor pieces are more valuable than rook and pawn. Going back to this position, I want to note that knight g5 is a perfectly acceptable move because black can't castle to defend. And this is just a main line. It's yeah, basically the fried liver attack after d5, and after takes, the main line is knight a5. If you want to see my comments about this line, you can see the previous episode of the speedrun. But yeah, let's move on. Nice instructive game. Do at least one more. I'm hoping by the end of this video, I'll reach 600 elo. So now I'm black. I'll play e5. Yeah, I think with a lot of games early in the series, we'll see a lot of these king pawn openings. But now we have something a little bit fresh. We have the beginning of a center game. Could be the beginning of a Danish Gambit. Now this is what we call the center game. Queen takes d4. And yeah, generally with this opening, knight c6 is just definitely the most principled. Attacking the queen. Queen moves back, so this is already some success. White has essentially wasted a couple of moves moving the queen up and back, and that's giving me time to get a pretty early lead in development. And I want to note, this might seem like very obvious, but there are different types of advantages in chess. Of course, like a big advantage is material. If you have more pieces than your opponent or more powerful pieces than your opponent, you're likely to have the advantage. But another type of advantage is just having more pieces developed, or just having more active pieces. And in this case, that might translate into some material advantage a bit later. So white's being a little bit slow. And yeah, generally in this this early phase of the game, we just want to activate the minor pieces, get the king safe, and then hopefully I can punish white for being a little bit slow to develop here. And with knight f6, not only am I preparing to castle, but I am attacking the undefended pawn on e4. So the best move here for white, I would think, is to play knight c3. Just develop the knight and defend the pawn. Or bishop d3. Oh no, my opponent disconnected. Will auto-resign in 20 seconds. I mean, this isn't a winning position for black. It's slightly better. But my advantage is temporary. Like, if white can play bishop d3, knight c3, just focus on getting the minor pieces out and castled, then white could very much be in the game. But I won by abandonment. Okay. This episode might have a lot of games, but okay, hopefully there is at least a couple lessons to take away there with the early opening sequence. Let's play another game. Playing Scotty Boy 91. And we'll have another King's Pawn opening. I think 4 games so far and 4 King Pawn openings. Play knight c6. Okay, so what do I want to do? Bishop c4. I'll play a standard Italian, bishop c5. If I play knight f6, that's a 2 knights defense, but that would allow for the fried liver shenanigans. So my opponent's following opening principles very finely here, and I will too. Just develop minor pieces. Oh, are we going to see the same type of sequence? I just made note of this from the previous game. Yeah, this can go both ways. Oh, that'll be so funny if we see the same sequence of moves, like take, 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 take. Yeah, I think there's a lot of players out there that maybe would go for this move. Now, we don't see knight takes f7, so this will be a little bit different. Queen f3, definitely aggressive. White's trying to exert more pressure on my king side. With this move, I have a few options. I could play h6 and then question, like, what is this knight doing? And then that would either provoke white to take or probably move back. I could play knight d4 as well. Knight d4 hitting the queen and the pawn, which is not defended. Honestly, I think knight d4 and h6 are both very fine moves. I think I'll play I think I'll play h6 first, and then save knight d4 for later. But it would be totally fine to play knight d4 first as well. Now we'll see. Okay, so white does take on f7, and hopefully for everyone who watched the previous game in this video, you'll remember the lesson that the 2 minor pieces are much more valuable than rook and pawn in the opening and the middle game. This is interesting. So white's not taking the rook because the rook's pinned, so I can't really easily like save the rook here. But what I can do, I should note, I don't want to play d5 because that would, I think that would walk into knight takes d5, and there'd still be so much pressure. So I'm much more inclined to play this move, knight d4. And this is very multi-purpose because I'm hitting the queen, I'm hitting the pawn, but I'm also preparing knight e6. Like if white moves the queen, I might just want to block the bishop and then save my rook. So that means that it's probably best for white to take the rook, although white doesn't do that. Now I do have a fork here, but unfortunately e2 is defended a bit too many times. So I guess it's a question, do I want to take the pawn or save my rook? I think it's much simpler just to save the rook. I mean, this is kind of a mathematical question, like what brings me the most value? Because I would go up a pawn here, but I'm allowing the trade, which, I mean, generally the rook is very valuable to keep, especially in a position like this where I don't have the f-pawn, so the file is half open for black. And yeah, very soon I could orchestrate some attack on the king side. Some move like knight h5 perhaps coming. Now d3, okay, so it's so important to acknowledge white's idea after this move, as white's unleashing the bishop, and the queen is pinning my g-pawn, so white wants to take the pawn on h6. And in this position, there's, I think, a few ways to deal with that. I was thinking I could counterattack with knight h5, but I think first I'd just like to get the king to a safer place. I like this move king h7, because it gets off the file of the queen and the diagonal of the bishop. Wow, I just not see the pawn was hanging? Oh, I forgot the pawn was hanging. I saw white's threat of this, I didn't see white's threat of queen takes e5. The funny thing is, I think this is a poison pawn. So I think there's a move for black here to exploit the queen and exploit this f-pawn. I'm going to play knight g4. Now, before I play this move, I have to kind of acknowledge that my bishop's defended, queen f5 is off limits because my rook will be unleashed. But knight g4 looks really nice because I'm hitting the queen, and now I have 3 attackers against f2. So that worked out kind of by accident. This might be one of the first times in this series my opponent played a move which I just completely overlooked. Just taking a free pawn. But sometimes when you're fully developed and your pieces are in good squares in the middle game, then even if you overlook something, your pieces will still be useful enough to kind of compensate whatever you overlooked. Now in this case, we have to essentially calculate, because there's 3 defenders of f2 and there's 3 attackers. Normally when there's the same number of defenders and attackers, then the defenders have an upper hand because the attackers will be the first to capture. But in this case, because the queen and king are both defenders and they're the most valuable things to protect for white, I think I can go ahead and just snag material. But I'm debating between knight takes, rook takes, or bishop takes. I think like all 3 moves are very possible here. Bishop takes is the most forcing. After which, yeah, we'd probably see rook takes and then I take with knight. I think I would much rather keep my bishop to be aligned with the king. I'm thinking if I take with knight, it looks good because I'm setting up discoveries, but if I take with knight, there's bishop e3. That blocks my bishop. Not sure if I'm winning much there. So rook takes actually looks like the most devastating move for white. And the reason why is because I'm setting up the discoveries. If rook takes, I take back with bishop and fork the king and queen. I'm going to do this. And if queen takes knight, then I'm going to have the discovered check. I have rook f4 to attack the king and then win the queen. So a lot of tactics coming into play here. But the pieces are very much working together. Okay, we do see rook takes, and I think the opponent didn't quite realize what's now happening to them. Yeah, there goes white's queen. So after pawn takes bishop, I'd just be up a queen, so opponent resigns. Another interesting, relatively quick but instructive game. We saw a similar lesson play out a little bit differently. Opponent went for this early attack on f7. And I mean, going back to basic opening principles, this is why you want to castle quickly to especially keep the f-pawn defended. And yeah, what ended up happening was very fine trade on f7. I managed to save the rook. In this position, if I saw the pawn was attacked, I would maybe still play this to set up the tactic with knight g4. I'm realizing I'm very thankful I didn't play knight h5, because then queen takes pawn and I wouldn't have the same follow-up. So anyway, yeah, hopefully viewers can learn something from this game. I have officially broken 600. I think I broke 600 after the previous game. So let's play at least one more. I'm hungry to get a checkmate. This is game number 5. I have yet to checkmate in this video. Playing Sauas. It's a lot of vowels in a row. Okay, this game might get aborted. Opponent might see my profile picture and be a little bit afraid here. Is baby Rosen too terrifying? Okay. No checkmate in that game. Alright, playing I Am Alpha Wolf. Good luck to my opponent. Almost mouse slipped king e5 there. So repeating the same opening. Now we have what's called a Scotch game. Pawn d4. Now in this position there are two viable developing moves. Knight f6 and bishop to c5. I like bishop c5. A bit more active. Immediately attacking the knight. Knight b3. So knight b3 saves the knight, but also attacks the bishop. So very important to realize white's threat. I'll simply move back to b6. Pawn f4. Okay, so aggressive move. Whenever white plays this move early in the game, you always want to be aware of this diagonal. Now I do have queen h4 check right away, but it doesn't really do much because white plays g3. Attacks the queen, saves the king, and there's really no great follow-up there. So I think this is more of a question of how do I just complete development and castle as quickly as possible. And I think I still like this move, knight f6. Yeah, I'm going to play knight f6. Now, it does look like I'm maybe walking into e5, which we do see, and I think this is good because we'll see how this plays out. Sometimes you want to be very wary of this move, but in this case, I have a couple options, and I don't have to move it. I do have queen e7 to pin the pawn, but I also have knight e4. And even though the knight maybe doesn't look so stable on e4, I would be threatening knight f2, or bishop f2, or even queen h4. Yeah, I like knight e4. Queen e7 I think would also be fine. Sometimes queen e7 you don't want to play if the bishop's still on f8, but in this case, well, in this case, yeah, I'm happy I played knight e4 because now I get to choose between a few good-looking moves. Now, I should note, bishop f2 looks good at first, but after king f1, knight would be attacked, knight's defending the bishop. I think bishop f2 is actually a big mistake. So it's really a question, do I want to go for knight f2 to win material, or do I want to go for queen h4 and try and exploit the king? I think a lot of players here would play knight f2 without much thought, but honestly, I think queen h4 is way more effective. I mean, rooks are valuable, but checkmating the king is priceless. And in this position, okay, the reason why I played queen h4 was because I saw what to do in this position is to take the pawn. Now, it looks like I'm exploiting the pin, which I kind of am. But more importantly, if pawn takes knight, could very likely have a mating sequence with queen takes. And this is probably a position where I have to use some of my calculation abilities to see the forcing line. So takes is not happening. Okay, so opponent moved quickly enough for me not to have to calculate that. In this case, I have some discover checks. Any knight move is check. I think I'm happy to take the rook, unleashing the queen. Maybe after the game I can show what the calculation could have been, like king d2, and yeah, there is some potential king walk. But in this case, yeah, still a matter of converting. Let's take on h2. I think this is an easy move to play. Win a pawn, keep the attack, also defend the knight. Now it's really about hunting the king here. I mean, white does have a few ways to get out of check. King can retreat, could move forward. Bishop e2, queen e2, also legal. Yeah, in a position like this with the king so exposed and my pieces forming, I was going to say that I would really like to go for some mating nets. Like, for example, queen e2 would be met with queen takes f4. Bishop e2, I'd probably go for knight g3 and target the bishop. King here. King there, I actually don't see an obvious move. Maybe also move the knight back, either here or here. So life was very good there for black. Do I want to analyze so much? I think that was another game where like my opponent didn't really develop efficiently. I developed more quickly, and we saw how that can translate into a very quick win with the early attack, especially moving the f-pawn, exposing the king. Can have pretty high consequences early in the game. Now, I guess the one line I did want to show is if takes. Of course, I could have taken the rook, and maybe I would end up taking the rook, but there was a fun line to take the pawn. If king here or here, it's queen f2 checkmate. And if king d2, there is this check. Maybe it's not checkmating. Yeah, this is one of these cases where it looks really good, but like bishop a5, there's knight takes a5. And then my queen's attack too, so maybe good that we did not go into that line. So, I don't want to end it here because I haven't gotten a checkmate over the board. So let's give it one more game. I think this is going to be the final game of the video regardless. This is a longer speedrun episode than usual, but yeah, trying to make up for it because I was absent for a while in this series. And we see d4. This is one of the first d4 games, I think. I'm going to play d5. And we see a queen's gambit. So there's a lot of openings to play against queen's pawn or against queen's gambit. I'm going to play what I like to recommend for beginner level is a queen's gambit declined. One of the most solid approaches. White plays e3, which is very playable. It does defend the pawn. The downside of e3, it does block the bishop, but that's also the downside of e6. I blocked my own bishop on c8. So generally, when you play the queen's gambit declined, it's nice to employ a setup with the knight coming to f6. This bishop usually comes to e7. If I move to d6, I could just get hit with c5. So I'm going to play bishop e7. And of course, castling can come early. And yeah, the setup I like to go for on the queen side is b6 and bishop b7 and then knight d7. And this is, I don't know if there's a name for it. Maybe the Tartakower variation it's one of the lines which black goes for this queenside fianchetto. But basically, I'll be getting a setup where pieces are very, very solid. White's playing quickly. I should note, white's playing the opening very fine. Maybe apart from this this bishop, like all the other pieces are on decent squares. Knight e5 looks scary. This move doesn't do anything so much, at least right away. And I'm going to continue with my development. And basically the plan, once I play this move, now we should note the bishop on d3 and queen on c2 do form the battery against h7, but the knight defends h7 along with the king, so it's not really a threat right away. I'll complete development with knight bd7. Ooh, I don't think my opponent saw my knight can take. I will say sometimes this can be a common oversight at the lower levels, is these backward knight moves. In this case, a backward knight capture. So I did just go up a piece. And I wanted to say earlier that, like, after my ideal setup, the plan is to expand with c5. And even though the position is transformed a bit, I think c5 is the way to make progress here. White's dreaming of trading off this pawn and checkmating me. But there's no immediate threat, so I think I'll make a threat of my own, attacking the knight, also unleashing the bishop. Now I do have some choices. I could take the pawn, but then I subject myself to rook to g1, and then, yeah, white could get some attack on the g file. So I'm mainly debating between queen takes pawn or pawn takes pawn. I think I like pawn takes pawn more, like simply attacking the knight. And basically, I'm seizing initiative here, because once the knight moves, I can keep making threats. I can play d3, I can play rook c8, I can play bishop b4. I'll play d3. d3 not only attacks the queen, but it obstructs the queen from defending the knight. So yeah, that's a free piece. Now up 2 minor pieces here with a very strong pawn. And pawn f3. So I'm considering bishop h4 here. Not sure how much that does, like king f1. I think I'm going to play a more tricky move. Like, of course, the simple move's to move back, but in the spirit of showing no mercy, queen d4. Also, oh no, my bishop. What I'm doing here is I'm making it so if white takes a bishop, or if white just does something random, then I win the queen. Bishop b4. So really no mercy here. And I will say, like, the first maybe 9 moves of this game were very, very fine from white. But, like, one of the keys to winning at this rating level is just waiting for the opponent to make mistakes, give you free material. And, yeah, patience can really pay off. So in this case, I could take the queen. Although I could also take the pawn if I just want to be patient. There's another move here. I'm going to play queen e3. It's a stylish move, but it's also showing no mercy. I'm taking advantage of the fact the queen is pinned, so queen takes queen was not legal, and now I take the queen. I do give white the chance to take the rook, but yeah, that wasn't a concern. And now, are we going to see the game end in checkmate? White has 1 legal move. White now has 2 legal moves. What's the quickest mate? Probably queen takes bishop. My rook is still attacked, but I'm happy to take. I'm still not mate. Can I set up en passant checkmate? No. Okay, let's just deliver mate in one. Bishop, bishop d5, pawn can't block because it's pinned. So, okay, the first checkmate of the video to conclude the final game of this video. I hope that was an instructive one. I think that this one was a nice example of how to play against the Queen's Gambit. Like sometimes you just want to be solid, like focus on opening principles, develop your pieces and castle as quickly as possible. I went for the queenside development. If my opponent didn't take and played a move like bishop d3 and castle, my plan was going to be bishop b7, knight bd7, eventually c5 and rook c8, and it's a very harmonious setup for black, where yeah, there's a lot of pawn tension, but the pawns are very well supported. Yeah, the game took a different route, and of course bishop h7. It's an important lesson for the opponent, and when you play hundreds or thousands, or in my case, like probably hundreds of thousands of chess games over the course of your life, it just becomes ingrained that knight defends h7 from f6. But for newer players, sometimes it takes a few accidents for the lesson to become ingrained. So anyway, yeah, I think I'm going to end the video here. Thanks so much for watching. Do stay tuned for the next episode. Maybe with every episode, I'll update my profile picture. Like every time I make a significant rating gain, I'll have a slightly older Rosen to show. So stay tuned, and I'll see you guys in the next one.